Thanks again, Angus. I'm going to talk about estimating tree water use. This was part of the PIPS project, finished 12 months ago, and just like to acknowledge the other two guys that worked on this project, Steve Green from Plant and Food in New Zealand, and our tireless technician, David Cornwall. I'll go straight into the objective, just try and save a bit of time here. So the objective of this bit of work was to investigate practical approaches to estimate tree water use from what's known as reference crop evapotranspiration, ETO as it's commonly referred to, and intercepted radiation. So the basis or the background behind that approach, or this bit of work, it really comes back down to the what's known as FAO 56, which is a standard guidelines on how to estimate crop evapotranspiration, this book here. And it's all based on this equation here, which I've changed it from crop water use to tree water use, equals what's known as a basal crop coefficient multiplied by our reference crop evapotranspiration. So ETO is basically water use of grass, so always keep that in mind when people are talking about it. It's water use from a well-watered pasture. So what we're trying to do in this project is really work out this coefficient here, which is to convert our grass water use to tree water use. And this bit of work is really testing the concept that we can use radiation interception as that conversion factor. So the approach, we measured tree water use using the sap flow technique. Won't go into a lot of detail, but we use this heat pulse condensation method. A colleague from New Zealand, Steve Green's quite famous in using this technique, recognised around the world. We installed these sensors in at multiple sites in commercial orchards. We did it both in pears and apples. And these are the sensors here, basically probes that stick into the tree. The middle probe here is basically a heater, and there's temperature sensors located in the upper and lower probes, and you're measuring the rate at which the heat moves through the xylem stream. It's picked up by the temperature sensors in the upper and lower temperature probes. We also measured, obviously, ETO, just using standard weather sensors, wind speed, solar radiation, temperature and humidity. We also measured PAR in these weather stations, which I'll come back to the reason for that in a little while. How we measured radiation interception, we stuck all these little light sensors, these little PAR sensors, in a grid across the row like this. So we were capturing the whole interrow from tree row to tree row, and we did that to really annoy the grower. So he couldn't spray the orchard, who's sitting right there. And from that data, of course, we can calculate and we can log the data, so we can do it on a whatever interval we want. In this case, it was a 15-minute interval, and calculate our total radiation interception over the day. So results. This is what tree water use looks like in a tree over a day. So over a 24-hour period from midnight to midnight. Basically, of course, it's dark back here. As sun comes up, we start getting an increase in transpiration or tree water use, and gets to a peak somewhere just after solar noon. Then, of course, it drops off in the afternoon. And we can sum that data and get our total daily water use, which is what this figure shows here over the season. This is actually in a pear orchard. So right from bud burst back here, all the way during midsummer, peaking, before harvest, midsummer this time here. This is in Williams, by the way, and then dropping off, progressively getting less over the rest of the season. These lines here, they're a combination. The blue one's rainfall, and the green ones are irrigation events. Our radiation interception looks like this. so from that, these sensors up here, basically increases to a maximum pretty early in the season, and then it's flatlining for nearly the whole season, and then drops off as we start to get leaf senescence late in the season. So that's our daily fraction of intercepted radiation. And this is what it looks like over a 24-hour period, that radiation interception, of course, dark back here. Then our radiation interception in the morning is very high, gets to a peak pretty early in the morning. As the sun goes over, if you like, the interception actually drops to a minimum level in the middle of the day because the sun's directly overhead, intercepting less radiation, then goes back up as the solar angle changes in the afternoon. So what we're interested in, of course, is if we're coming up with practical ways to try and calculate tree water use for the purpose of irrigation scheduling, we don't want to stick sensors like this in rows of trees for growers to try and measure radiation interception. So we've developed up a simple approach to do this estimation based on measuring shade, in other words, the shade that's cast by the trees, which is equivalent to interception, radiation interception, and doing that at 3 times during the day. About 3 to 3.5 hours before solar noon, at solar noon when the sun's directly overhead, and then 3.5 hours later in the afternoon. And by taking the average of those 3, you actually get a good estimate of radiation interception over the entire day. And that's what basically this data shows. I won't go into the detail, but basically we're plotting here estimates based on measurements 3 times a day versus continuous measures at 15-minute intervals over the entire day. So yeah, when we start looking at these relationships between our tree water use measured with our sap flow versus our ETO multiplied by our radiation interception, this is the relationship that we get. So every one of those points is over the whole season, multiple sites in an orchard, so it's the average of all those multiple sites in the orchard. So this is one site, and you can see that there's a pretty good relationship there between our water use, this axis here, and the bottom axis here is our effective area of shade multiplied by our reference crop of evapotranspiration. So a pretty good relationship there, and it boils down to this number here, 1.1 times EAS. That's equivalent to our what's called a basal crop coefficient. So it's a way that we can calculate tree water use from effective area of shade. So another orchard here. This is an open Tatura orchard, open Tatura trellis orchard, and again a pretty identical relationship to the previous orchard. We also did this work in apples. We actually didn't do this as part of PIPS. We did it outside the scope of PIPS, but I think it's worthwhile presenting it to this audience. So it's for apple, and what we found is again a pretty good relationship, but it's a little bit higher. So we've got this 1.3 is the slope of this line when you fit a regression through here, 1.3 times our effective area of shade multiplied by a reference crop. So we also did some, I forgot about this slide, 8 minutes. So we also did some measurements in a netted orchard, and as you can see from this data, there's a pretty good relationship between, this is our ETO out in the open. So we did that because, when you're actually getting data from the Bureau of Meteorology on reference crop ETO, then you need to basically to somehow adjust that for the rate for the ETO that might be in the netted orchard. So very good relationship between our tree water use and our ETO out in the open. And this is the point I wanted to emphasise on this slide here, is that in a netted orchard like this here, we're getting about 20% reduction in radiation going through the, is basically getting taken out by the netting. And that had about a 21% reduction in our ETO. So I think for the purposes of irrigation management in netted orchards, you can if you know how much radiation is being knocked out by your netting, then you can do a simple adjustment of your reference crop evapotranspiration, ETO, depending on how much radiation is knocked out by the netting. The other point too is that, well, how do you measure effective area of shade? We were doing it in these orchards by a grid of sensors that we just then took the observations at 3 times a day. But there are other ways that we've developed. One of my colleagues is using a light bar here. We affectionately call it a stick, but it actually does measure radiation along the bar. So you can use that to accurately get a measure of how much light's intercepted by the trees at 3 times during the day. And this guy, this is John Hornbuckle from CSIRO at Griffith, or ex-CSIRO Griffith, and they developed a light bar on the front of a 4-wheel motorbike, that you could drive down the roads and get a measure of light interception. And then, of course, there's simpler approaches where you can do an eyeball estimate of how much shade's cast by the tree at different times, and a simple ruler stuck on the ground to give you a measure of how much light's intercepted. So in conclusion, we found that tree water use can be estimated from in pairs from 1.1 times effective area of shade times ETO, and for apple it's 1.3 times EAS. EAS can be estimated from observations, as I said, in the morning, solar noon, and then the afternoon. The interesting thing too, you remember the figure I had over the whole season of light interception. Basically, it's constant, so there's no need to be going out there every week and measuring this. You can really just be getting a measurement mid-season. If you want to go, and push your luck, you could do it once, but I'd probably say you want to take a couple of measurements. And I might have also mentioned that, of course, ETO is now a standard measurement that's taken by the bureau. You can access it via the bureau website, or historical data via what's called Silo. I might end it there, actually, Angus.